Topic here is early 2000, Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're going to be looking at just a series of events, photographs from that particular time period. You may be assigned this particular sheet in class that you would be required to turn in for credit. So here we go. Questions. Is it possible to stabilize a nation after a war? And will the U.S. presence in Iraq and Afghanistan lead to more anger toward the U.S. or less? And so I think the answer to these questions, it's probably going to lead to more if you're, buying into bin Laden's interpretation of Islam. Is it possible to stabilize a nation after war? That's going to be difficult. So for the most part, we have a series of scandals, beheadings, and it's just a whole host of things that happen once the United States enters into Iraq and Afghanistan. So we're going to just look at a couple of these, and then you can look them up and get more information about them. So I'm just going to do a quick introduction. So for the most part, U.S. soldiers were given a deck of cards. This deck of cards listed every Iraqi political and military official that represented a threat to the United States, and this was designed to give U.S. soldiers an understanding of who these people possibly were, what they looked like, and so on. Early on in the war in Iraq, you see the first U.S. hostages taken into custody. And so when we're looking at the images here, and again, these are the first ones that, wind up getting more publicity, possibly because it was the first one, it was televised, and people started to, really see the brutalities of war. So we see the names listed here, and this image was all over the newspapers, front cover. Then, of course, we have Jessica Lynch, who was later captured or later recovered. But these individuals, pretty much, if you click these links, you can see, they were being asked questions. Who are you? What's your name? And when you watch the clips, they just seem terrified. I'm not going to click those links because I don't want to get flagged for copyright or anything like that. Now, this next series looks at beheadings. The Bush administration was criticized, for allowing companies like Halliburton to, issue contracts. And so what winds up happening is you have the country of Iraq, and then you wind up sending civilian contractors. And civilian contractors could be individuals that are driving trucks to deliver material. Maybe they're welders, radio repairmen, and so on. Well, these individuals are there for some pretty substantial compensation for their contracts. Depending on the situation, you could possibly make $100,000 a year, being a truck driver, tax free. The problem was that some of these individuals were beheaded, and I do not suggest looking up any of the beheading videos. I am simply just presenting it as information. I have not seen any of the beheading videos. I do not want to see any of the beheading videos. But we do know that some of these individuals were, on the news, more so than especially the first couple. And so with Nick Berg, this individual was captured and beheaded. Again, I do not suggest looking. There was a series of beheadings that did take place. These things were, broadcast on television and on the news, and people were able to find them online. I do not suggest you do that. How should the U.S. deal with Iraq and Afghanistan's prisoners of war? So now it's going to lead to the Abu Ghraib scandal. The Abu Ghraib scandal was a prison in Iraq, and these photographs were later released that show U.S. soldiers with Iraqi prisoners in some pretty sad situations here. So here we see homophobia kicking in. Men are stripped naked, bags over their head, and put in piles. This individual is being electrocuted. You see the U.S. soldier here. I can't imagine bin Laden looking at these photographs and identifying with this individual because of 9/11. He's probably going to identify with this individual, and it will confirm in bin Laden's mind, and everybody buying into his interpretation and his ideology that, yes, the United States is not a force of good. "11 soldiers convicted of various charges relating to the incidents, dereliction of duty, minor sentences." So these photographs that come out, the Bush administration seemed to be concerned about images of the war. We go back to the lessons of Vietnam, the Vietnam War, when we're looking at incidents like the My Lai massacre, we're looking at the Napalm Girl. These were all images that upset the Americans that led to the anti-war movement. And so trying to control the images would be crucial. And these images, the significance of them for that time was simply, this war is out of hand. You don't have a control on this. This image here, was showing the bodies, coming home, the caskets. And there was, again, limited, there were so many controls on what was allowed to be, shown, recorded, and photographed. And it was not until the Obama administration lifted some of those restrictions where you started to see some of the images, the brutality of war. Here you see U.S. soldiers urinating on Taliban corpses. And again, they are fighting a war. I don't want to make excuses for these 3 U.S. soldiers. However, I keep going back always to the point, they just do not understand what the war is about. They're probably looking at this war through the lens of 9/11 and a horrific attack. But if you don't understand that this war, they're looking at this through the lens of religion. Bin Laden's side. They're looking at this as the U.S. is the bad guy. That the U.S. doesn't respect our culture, our religion, doesn't respect us as human beings. And images like this would simply confirm that belief in the mind of Al-Qaeda operatives. Here we see another beheading, Daniel Pearl. U.S. military policy. This story had come out and aggravated people because it said that the American troops are doing their best to bury Iraqi troops in accordance with Muslim traditions. The bodies are going to point towards Mecca. So this is problematic. U.S. soldiers are in harm's way, and people felt that this act was respecting their cultural traditions and norms too much. You're fighting a war. If the person's engaged, they're dead, they're dead. That's it. This shows the Bush administration really trying, though, to respect those traditions, possibly for no other reason other than to, challenge that, or don't give bin Laden evidence to suggest, that this is a war, that they don't respect us as human beings. They don't view our lives as any value or our religion. Special administrative measures. This is an interesting piece of legal language. In any case where the Attorney General orders, based on the information from the head of federal law enforcement or intelligence agent, the responsible for suspicion exists to believe that a particular inmate may use communication. So in this case, I guess this is about somebody being in jail, accused of, acts of terrorism. And now the Attorney General is getting information that an inmate may use the communication with attorneys or their agents to further facilitate acts of terrorism. So this individual's in jail, and they work with a lawyer. And the question here is whether or not the lawyer, when he visits his client, it could be a she. Here's the briefcase. This individual is going to give information to the lawyer, and then that lawyer is going to transmit that information. So in other words, the lawyer is in cahoots with this individual here. So what's going to happen in this scenario with this measure? appropriate procedure for the monitoring or review of communications between that inmate and attorneys or attorney's agent were traditionally covered by the attorney-client privilege. So now they're getting rid of the attorney-client privilege. Deterring future attack could result in death or serious bodily harm, back to the United States. So for the most part, what they're saying here is your ability to communicate with your attorney, it's not going to happen. If we suspect that you are giving information to your attorney that could be used to injure, commit a terrorist attack, then we are going to be in a position where we have to monitor and review the communication between that inmate and the attorney. So attorney-client privilege, no longer allowed. So you got to think about that Patriot Act, think about the spying, think about the torture memos. There are a lot of changes that are happening. A lot of rights are changing. The story of Wikileaks, Julian Assange. So Julian Assange has a site called Wikileaks, and they start to gather a report, compile a report of almost 400,000 excerpts, military stuff from the war in Iraq. And they posted on this site, Wikileaks, and you can access what's the end result. Everything and anything negative about the war in Iraq, you can access through Wikileaks. Julian Assange, this individual was wanted. Where did he get the access to the information? How is he distributing it? And he has a series of other reports that wind up coming out. But the Iraq war logs is where this story really starts to take place. This was an example of WikiLeaks. The Iraq war logs, if you wanted to read about criminal events, friendly action, friendly fire, non-combatant events, rape, anything that was going to happen that was negative about the war, you could easily access those files. Embedded reporters. In this war in Iraq, you saw embedded reporters. So embedded reporter would be like this guy and this guy. The military, when you join the military, you can be a reporter, you can write for the Army Times or whatever, but this is MSNBC, CNN, Fox, whatever. They were actually embedding reporters, sending them to the battlefield with the military to report on what was going on in the conflict, and again with some controls. Western Union, one another change with regard to transfer of money. We know that prior to 9/11, money was transferred back to Al-Qaeda, and Western Union put in place reforms. They generated a list, and if your name was like Muhammad Atta bin Laden, you probably were not going to be able to transfer money through Western Union once it was of a substantial amount, that they were going to delay or block. Chief UN Weapons Inspector admits Iraq has no weapons of mass destruction. UN talks on Afghanistan, December 5, 2001. So here we're starting to look at what's going to happen with Afghanistan. Afghanistan is invaded first and then Iraq. They're trying to end the tragic conflict in Afghanistan and promote national reconciliation. So here we see some of the first, Afghan votes taking place. That's what's significant about this particular, these photographs here. The Iraqi constitution. So by October 12, 2005, Iraq comes up with a constitution. Here you have some excerpts. Islam is the official religion of the state. And it kind of goes on. Blackwater Scandal. The Blackwater Scandal, we're talking about people as a private army. So the question that this issue raised, the United States military is in Iraq fighting Iraq. So here we have U.S. Army and we have an Iraqi. This individual has to follow certain rules of engagement. They have to follow certain procedures that comply with like international law and so on. While Blackwater, think about them like a private army. The United States government hires Blackwater, then Blackwater sends its military forces to Iraq to pretty much do the same thing in other missions. Are these individuals still asked to follow these regulations. They're operating differently. Also want to point out that one of the stories, these individuals were paid a lot more than U.S. soldiers. The U.S. soldier could have been paid $18,000, whereas a Blackwater individual is being paid $100,000 to be there. Like, that just shows how much care for the troops we have. And by the way, I did serve in the military. Just throwing that out there. United States, Code of Military Justice, and that seems to be the issue here. U.S. soldiers can be tried in military courts. Could Blackwater soldiers be tried under these laws? And, bringing up the pay issue here. So that's kind of what we have, the difference for these soldiers. The Halliburton Scandal. Halliburton, Cheney, the Vice President of the United States, seemed like this company, Halliburton, seemed to be getting a lot of the contracts. So people were questioning why the Vice President of the United States, who was connected with this company, Halliburton, and then for some reason, Halliburton seemed to be getting all of the contracts in Iraq. And then people felt Iraq was for sale. But, people were making money off of the conflict that was supposed to be about responding to 9/11. Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay is interesting, going back to the Spanish-American War. According to the Spanish-American War and agreement with Cuba, the United States has control of Guantanamo Bay. So Guantanamo Bay is not physically part of the United States. So now the question is, does the Constitution and other U.S. Legal language that would apply to citizens, is it going to apply to anybody sent to Guantanamo Bay? And the answer is going to be no. There's been constant debate about trying to shut down Guantanamo Bay. Saddam Hussein is captured December of 2003. Here we see some of the casualties. Even the casualties would be upsetting, where people looking at the amount of dead and supporters of Al Qaeda raising the question of proportionality. Like, why is it that 3,000 Americans lose their lives on 9/11 and Iraq has to pay the price of 500,000 dead? What's the ratio for every American life in comparison to an Iraqi life? What is the exchange? What's the ratio for every American that died on 9/11? How many Iraqis have to die in response? That's the argument of proportionality. We see some death by rank. Notice the female death. May 1, 2001. That's a typo there. The Bin Laden raid took place. And here you see the compound that was targeted by United States forces. But by that time in Iraq, you see al-Zarqawi take charge of al-Qaeda in Iraq. When he dies, as shown here, the new leader al-Baghdadi would take his organization, al-Qaeda in Iraq, and create the group called ISIS.